Hey, everybody, and welcome to Industry Night with me, Nycci Nellis, the show that takes you on the deep dive of the happenings of the hospitality industry. So if you're new here, hi, welcome. If you're old here, hi, and welcome. A little bit of information about me. I've been covering the DC food, wine, and hospitality scene for the last 20 years. Honestly, not just DC. A little bit of national, a little bit of global, but a lot in the DC metro area. If you read the list, areyouwantit.com, the online e-zine that tells you everything that's happening here, you know that's me. That's my little baby, started 20 years ago. Every food and wine event, every opening, everything that's coming soon, every promotion, everything. It's all in there. We don't sell, we tell. That's our motto at thelistareyouwantit.com. And you hear me every Sunday on DC's only food and wine variety show, Foodie and the Beast. We have been on 15 years. It's unbelievable, and we have so much fun doing that every Sunday. You follow me at NYCCINELLIS on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Threads, all the platforms. I'm everywhere. Oh, and YouTube, because Industry Night, this show that you're listening to or watching right now, we are on YouTube, so please subscribe. Okay, so as you can see, this doesn't look anything like the place I was in last week, but I do have this new residency. It is for the entire month of December. And as I mentioned last week, we are at the Watermark Hotel, which is at the Capital One area here in Tysons. So if you haven't been out here, it's really going to throw you off, because when people say Tysons, you think the malls, which please, you can think of. But there's this whole other area, and the Watermark Hotel is one of the shining stars. And within it is this fabulous restaurant called Wren. They do an incredible omakase. They have amazing cocktails. But as I said last week, and as I say to almost everybody I talk to, when you come out here, you're like, what is happening here? Where am I? And when did this all just sprout out of the ground like Oz? Well, later in the show, I'm going to be talking to Osman Cuadros.
Yes, thank you.
Was I right? Yes? Okay. He's the general manager here at the Watermark Hotel. He's been around since the beginning, and he's going to share us about that. And then later, I'm talking to my guest. I'm so excited because my friend wrote a book, and it's really good. Katherine Miller, at the table, The Chef's Guide to Advocacy. She shares essential techniques that she's developed initially for the Shane Beard Foundation Chefs Boot Camp. She was with Chef Action Network. Thanks to Katherine, chefs and other people have all learned advocacy, how to use your voice and make change. So more on that from her when we talk. Okay, we're at one of my favorite parts of the show. Where have I been? Well, no surprise, I've been out and about. I actually not only came out to the Watermark Hotel last week, but then I wound up coming out to this area again because I did not know that the new restaurant by Chef Kyle Bailey and the Long Shot Hospitality team, O Mateo, is right across the street. This is their new Tex-Mex restaurant. Let me just tell you, if you're fans of Dauphin's or the Salt Line, you will not be disappointed. The space is gorgeous, really beautiful. They spent some money on this space. The lounge upstairs has a real Tulum-esque vibe. I kind of just want to sit there, hang out, and have drinks. Really good guac, really good chips. The menus come together beautifully, and Kyle Bailey looks great behind that kitchen. It's got a little open window. So add that to your own list. I did go to Sean Yancey's Girl Night Out. You know Sean from NBC4. She's a real motivator here in DC. And every year she does this amazing event to raise money for women and children. And when Sean Yancey calls, everybody's like, yeah, I'll be there. So the whole NBC4 crew was there, as were so many other fun people. And all of it raised money for this incredible foundation that really does so much to support women and children here in the DC area. Grazie Mille has opened, and it is around the corner from Grazie Nonna. Casey Patton and his team, their amazing Italian restaurant, Grazie Nonna, great pizzas, great pastas, but you have to wait online. There's no reservations. I have a problem with that personally, but that's just my thing. Anyway, around the corner is this little secret spot. It was a chicken place, but it's no longer. It is now Grazie Mille, and it is this really swanky bar. Now, there is a menu there, lots of dips and focaccia, oysters, things of that nature. The music is a little loud for my liking, personally, but I may be on the other end of the age spectrum to enjoy music at that decibel. Having said that, the place is gorgeous. Very LA. It's got a great vibe. Definitely worth checking out. We did go around the corner to Dauphines. This was a Kyle Bailey weekend and had some really good seafood. His crab claws are like my favorite in the city. And I love that space. It feels very adult. And then lastly, every year now for the last 19 years, I have been part of a group that started with just 4 of us, and now it's like 18 of us. It's called Office Party for those of us who don't have offices. And it's myself, Amanda McClements, Amber Fow, and David Hagedorn. We started this 19 years ago, believe it or not. It was just a little luncheon. We just all hung out, drank some wine, had a good time. Now it's a massive endeavor. I hosted it yesterday. I did all the cooking. Amber Fow was terrific and being my sous. But the really cool thing was this group that was on my radio show, Foodie and the Beast, Party Host Helpers. I hired them to come in. There was a bartender and a helper, and they just made my life so easy. I never thought I needed a bartender at a party, but making sure somebody's walking around, keeping glasses filled, making sure people have water. You know, this young woman, Kendall, was in the back. She was plating things and putting them out and picking up the napkins and cups and cleaning them. Anyway, it was a dream. And I think everybody had a wonderful time. And I got rid of 19 of my 50 pumpkin cakes and 19 of my 30 chocolate cakes, part of my holiday giveaway, and there's still some more left. So I'll keep you up to date with that all next week. Okay, I think that's enough about me. Whew. All right. So hello, Osman. Hi. Welcome. How are you? General Manager, Watermark Hotel. I met you right when this place opened.
But before that, I need to get the address where to pick up my pie.
Okay. Right? Oh yeah. Right. Of course. No, I'll just bring it next week. Don't worry.
You bring it.
So. When I first came out here a year and a half ago, maybe, I feel like the Watermark building was like the only building here. I'm sure these buildings around me were here, but it is like a community that sort of came out of nowhere. So can you talk a little bit about what Capital One and BF Sol and what's happening here?
Of course, thank you and welcome back to the Watermark Hotel. Mm-hmm. We continue to be, just the excitement hasn't stopped since we opened 2 years ago. Mm. Yes, as you mentioned, when you come to Tysons, if you missed it for 3 months, when you come back, you see a new building that just appeared out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And really nice, from what I see happening in Tysons, a lot of residentials, condos, senior buildings for the senior living, some corporate offices, moving into Tysons. So there's a lot happening, and I'm personally just thrilled to be able to be part of it. And we're thrilled to be able to be able to be in the heart of Tysons at this point. Mm-hmm. Capital One themselves, they just opened their last building. So there used to be 2. Now they opened their last one, wow, which is right across the street from the entrance of Capital One Hall. Mm-hmm. You'll see it when you're going to Mateo. Some of these new restaurants also joining us. Right now we are sitting in the 24th floor of one of our suites. We have 300 suites. We have a 2,000 square feet gym in the 25th floor. The hotel is doing fantastic. We are thrilled to see that guests continue to find about us. I think it's a new business.
But so can we talk about this suite that we're in? Because there's like a little kitchenette. It's a very massive footprint, right? Like it's well appointed, but 2 very large bedrooms, a beautiful big bathroom. So we're in a suite, which is very swanky. But tell us about like what most of the rooms look like and what people can expect here in the hotel.
Sure. Actually, we have all suites.
Oh, okay.
So we have all 300 suites, different sizes, mm-hmm, from 600 to 1,800 square foot. And this particular one has 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, full size refrigerator, stove.
Yeah, dishwasher.
And a dishwasher, and actually a washer and dryer. Mm. So we have and what I guess the goal the goal behind this design, mm-hmm, was to make something that has touches of luxury and elegance, but at the same time a level of comfort. and coziness.
Well, and
So,
functionality.
and functionality for
So
sure.
do all the suites have some form of kitchenette?
Yeah, every single one of them.
Wow.
Microwave and refrigerators in all of them. And one of my personal favorite things of our suites is just the floor to ceiling windows
Yes.
and the view.
Mhm.
That's just me, just always just happy to,
Now,
just
do
to
all
walk
the
into.
rooms start, because when you come in, you go to the lobby, and that starts on the 11th floor where the perch is. Then are all the rooms 11th and up?
We actually have some that are from the 4 to 8.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so 4 to 8, and 9th floor is restaurants, and then 11 is lobby slash rooftop.
Uh-huh.
As you know, we have a 4-acre rooftop in the 11th floor,
Yes.
where we have an 18-hole mini golf, food trucks, Star Hill, the brewery, live entertainment almost daily, spring and summer,
Uh-huh.
spring and summer months, and then underneath the perch, which is a rooftop, there's Capital One Hall
Right.
with 1,600 seats that are now that they have a Broadway comedy and great concerts.
Well,
So it's a fun destination.
I think that that's so interesting because there really was no theater out here. Not like independent theater, but a place for touring groups. They all go to the Kennedy Center, the Warner, or the National, but there was no place to come out here.
The closest was what is the amphitheater outdoor?
Meriwether?
No, right in Vienna. It just
Yes.
Skibberman, but that was the only one, and that which is outdoor.
Right.
So this is again. I mean, I would say, just in my opinion, after Kennedy Center, this is probably the second one.
Okay.
Just in terms of just
size.
just the elegance, size, and just everything else. So again, a lot to do, and it's year round.
Right.
Year round, from, as I said, from comedy to circus to kid shows, even kid shows. So again, hopefully, we're now having more restaurants joining Capital One Center. We're sure that we're gonna continue to see new guests.
Great. Excellent. Well, I'm so excited to be doing my show here. And thank you so
You're
much
welcome.
for having me and for allowing us to use this beautiful suite today.
Thank you very much.
We will be posting some video later on my Instagram feed so
Thank you.
people can see the cool digs.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Osman. Thank you so much. All right. So Katherine Miller is up next. Now, Jose Andres, you know him. He went to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, and he said in an interview, I think it was with Anderson Cooper, he said, who better to feed people than chefs? Like, we know how to feed people. We know where the food is. We know where the stove is.
Yep.
We know how to cook. And I really think about that phrase so often because who better to look at what's on hand, what's around, and how do we feed those in need? And I thought, God, for so long, FEMA, not that there's anything wrong with it, but all these people are trying to feed people, but they don't have the chefs there to do them. And so he's really become this huge advocate. And, I think that's so interesting because Katherine, really, way before Jose took up the cause to what World Central Kitchen is today, you have built this 20-year career. I'm just looking at my notes. You worked on policy. You work in politics. Everything has a social impact. Everything you've belonged in. But then you really sort of focused in on food.
Yeah.
And then you brought the chefs in. So, you have this gorgeous book, At the Table, The Chef's Guide to Advocacy, which I love. It's just chock full of inspirational ways. Or let me rephrase that. It's chock full of ways to take your inspiration and act on it. So let's talk about sort of where you started. How did you become this policy person and then an advocacy person,
Yeah.
right? Because the two don't always meet.
Yeah, no, the two definitely don't meet. I sort of always describe my career as a career in thirds, right? I spent the first 10 or plus years working on politics, raw political campaigns. And the things that I
Anybody
learned...
good?
Some good folks, yeah.
Okay.
A couple of presidential campaigns, a couple of, gubernatorial races, Senate races, all over the country. And what I love about campaign work, right, is that much like a kitchen, you have a goal, you have a team that's working towards the goal, and every day is a new day, right? But you can never lose sight of the goal, whether it's to elect Barack Obama, whether it's to,
Mm-hmm.
elect a new Supreme Court in the state of Texas, right?
Yesterday.
All those sorts of things. Like, there's always a goal, but every day is different, right? Because every time we wake up, the world's just a tiny bit different. And so I loved that about political campaigns. It also, as a young person working on political campaigns, I had a lot of responsibility very early, which I also think is very similar to kitchens, right? The people who are making and serving your food.
Yeah, they just throw you into the fire.
They just throw you in, right? And then I took all that I had learned on political campaigns and took that into the corporate world / foundation world and started building large-scale social impact campaigns. And again, the idea that if we build authentic relationships with people in our communities, they'll do stuff for us, right? I think we spend a lot of time as marketers or communicators running around trying to find the most famous person, when we really should be looking for the most influential person. And it's not always the same thing.
That's such a fascinating point. I want to get to that, but I feel like we're going to go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, we're going to go down a rabbit hole. But
but how did you decide? How do you leave politics?
Yeah.
And be like, okay, this is an important issue. I want action on it.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's the core of your book, but how did you personally start that? And then what you did was create a footprint or a roadmap. Better.
Yeah, roadmap or a recipe or footprint, like if you want to keep it all in the food world, right? I think for me, I really was looking for something that was much more personally fulfilling, right? And also something that I felt like I could make a difference doing, right? And that wasn't necessarily about any one person, right? Like that's a political campaign thing. Like it's about that person, right?
Electing a Barack Obama is electing Barack Obama. But if you're talking about a cause,
if you're talking about
something, you're like sustainability or food waste, things of that nature, it's a 360 issue.
It's a 360 issue. There's a lot of opportunity to bring like-minded people who might not agree on other things together, right? When we think about that. So it's not, and I always talk about the difference too. I wanted to move from something that was strictly partisan and raw knuckle politics into something that was more policy focused, more action focused. And the thing that I ran into in the policy world was that many folks there didn't come from campaigns, right? So they're, they don't have an urgency to them, or they don't, or that problem's already been there for 30 years. So it's going to keep being there. So like we have to make our incremental change. And I was really anxious.
That sounds really frustrating. That sounds like a bless your heart. Like you're like, no, there's a problem here. You're like, yeah, we know. We've been working on it.
Yeah.
Like that would be really upsetting to me to hear.
Yeah, and I think it was upsetting. It was also upsetting and still is that a lot of nonprofit and advocacy organizations aren't really dedicated to putting themselves out of business, which in my mind, every foundation should be sunsetting. They should be spending all the money that they have.
That is
Organizations
such a good point.
should be working to end poverty, and if they end poverty, they've done their job and they should go away.
Right.
But that's actually not how.
No, I was just thinking of this is no hit on Deb Shore and, Share Our Strength. No Kid Hungry. I mean, they've been at it a long time.
Yep.
Deb has said, we know how to feed kids.
Yeah.
We know how to take care of it. And yet we still struggle in this country with getting our kids fed.
We still struggle with, hunger is 100% a policy choice,
right?
I mean, what we have decided, who we prioritize. And I think that there are frontline organizations that feed people have figured out how to do it, whether it's innovative organizations like West Side Campaign Against Hunger in New York, whether it's large-scale national campaigns, like No Kid Hungry, whether it's places like DC Central Kitchen in our own area, whether it's World Central Kitchen, right? There is always going to be a need for emergency feeding. Right. And one of the things that we haven't quite figured out how to do is to make sure that everyone has the financial resources, the access, and the ability to to know where their food is coming from all the time. So I found that really frustrating in the global health space. And I really wanted to work in conditions that were more focused on not just how we treat the problem, but how we actually solve the problem.
Okay.
And so I started working with foundations and nonprofits and others as a consultant. And that was how, two trustees of the James Beard Foundation, a guy named Eric Kessler, who's a DC area philanthropy advisor, and Michelle Nishan, who's a chef out of Connecticut, had this idea of celebrity chefs as spokespeople. And it was very much modeled off this idea of rock stars on Capitol Hill talking about healthcare or,
Mental
talking
health
about
or whatever.
mental health and so they came to me and they said, would you do this?
But
And
were there causes that they wanted to eradicate or push?
no. So this is the interesting thing, right?
Okay.
Like, I think
They wanted the chefs to have their own
they
causes.
wanted chefs to have a voice and
Mm-hmm.
the tools to use that voice effectively, right? And it was almost issue agnostic, right? Because we're all individuals. We might think about something might touch our heart and our minds very differently than somebody else. So
Mm-hmm.
you might be really interested in food waste, or this person, Kyle Bailey, is super interested in seafood sustainability.
Right.
It's like part of his brand, part of his
Mm-hmm.
piece. So it wasn't intended to be like, we are going to fix these problems in the food system. It was that there are people missing from the table. All these policy conversations they're not utilizing spokespeople who literally sit at every corner of our nation, right? There are restaurants, mom and pops, 5 stars, everything in between in literally every community in America.
Right.
And those are the people that you trust to feed you well, that you go to celebrate your promotion, your job. They employ so many people got their first jobs in the food system,
Of
right, in
course.
restaurants. Like, I was a really bad waitress at my family's restaurant. Never again. Right.
I was a hostess for years.
No, it was
They wouldn't give me a tray, but I got to greet people. I was very good at that.
yeah, no, that's what my family did. They moved me to the greeting position. Right. So these restaurants and those businesses sit in every community, but they weren't being asked to sit at these policy tables, nor did they know how to
behave in that.
how to behave, how to get in the door.
It's so funny. Years ago, like 20, like maybe 19 years ago, I've been around like in the industry for like a year.
Yeah.
And I sat on this panel on sustainability at the Smithsonian.
Uh-huh.
It was mostly chefs and me. I'm just not really sure how I wound there, but I was like, I had learned
I'm some
early
ideas.
on, like people were always like, if you get asked to do something, you just say yes. So I
Yeah.
say yes to everything. For better or for worse. But Bob Kincaid was on the panel with me, and so was Barton Seaver. Maybe it was like 16 years ago. Anyway, at the time, Barton Seaver was like the sustainable seafood guy. Like, he got your message, and he was like, I am going to trumpet this. This is my cause. And somebody in the audience asked a question about communicating with chefs.
Yeah.
And how, what is the best way to learn from chefs about these issues, whether it's sustainability, local farming, whole animal, etc. And Bob Kincaid got up and said, I just want to be clear. Chefs are assholes, and most chefs are uneducated. And if you're looking for us to educate you, you're wrong. And I was like, or don't go to Bob. I mean, I literally spoke up. I was like, or don't go to Bob Kincaid.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of chefs out here
Yeah.
who really have causes that they're passionate about, and they're not just serving it on your plate. They'll tell you about it if you ask.
Yeah, and I think that was really when Michelle and Eric were thinking about this, they were thinking about this reputation, right? And that no one was going to ask, Tom Colicchio or Jose Andres at the time, or any of these people to give them advice or share information about a policy that impacted them. And it was a complete missed opportunity, right? And the other thing that was happening on the chef side was that all these nonprofits were raising money by promoting the chefs' like involvement in their fundraiser, right? But they weren't building really authentic relationships.
Right. They weren't like, I just don't have to pay you to be here. You could take up this cause if it speaks to you.
And, and I talk about this a little bit in the book. There's, I started doing audits of how much chefs were donating to causes and how often they were asked. And, on average, it's about $50,000 in time, gift certificates, cookbooks, right? The problem is they're giving that $50,000 to like 100 different organizations in the community. If you gave $50,000 to any one organization, you would be one of its top donors.
Sure. No,
right?
it's
And
a
they
really
would
good
treat
point.
you differently, right? You would be invited to different things. They would engage you in conversation, right? And so taking all of those chefs, all of that money that they're giving, and no one's asking their opinion. No one's saying like, what's the problem facing restaurant workers related to hunger, right? how do we deal with food waste? How are we going to change this? Right. So there was a real opportunity, but one of the challenges was that we needed them to be informed and reasonable and advocates.
Well, and educated.
Educated.
So, and I don't mean just educated on the topic.
Yeah.
I mean educated in how to communicate.
Yeah. Right. Because
not everybody knows how to communicate.
And especially not on policy, right? Like policy or the changes that we want to see in the world are hugely complicated. Mm-hmm. They're also, they require coalition building. They require different types of language. They require different ways of showing up, mm-hmm. right? And so we really saw this shift. We started to train the chefs 15 at a time for the James Beard Foundation, the Chef Bootcamp for Policy and Change. Mm-hmm. And then what we saw was...
So what was it, like a 3-day thing?
It's 3 days. It's still continuing today. Mm-hmm. And it's a wonderful... I love the program because...
Well, first of all, it was super networking.
Super
right?
networking.
Like, I just know so many women who did it,
yep.
who just, like, came away like they went to sleepaway camp for the weekend. Do you know what I mean? Like, they just came away with new contacts and, really like, maybe they came away with like, I can do something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, which was the idea, right? Like you awaken their brains mm-hmm. and you give them the tool, you make it sparkly, and then they know that they can do something. Mm-hmm. And then how they then go off and the causes that they care about or the things they pick is totally up to them, mm-hmm. right? But they have a toolbox, right?
And so like what's in this toolbox without giving away everything? But like what are some of the things in this toolbox? Because what I'd like to talk about is like what you're suggesting to people,
yep.
how they do it, and then let's talk about some of the success stories that you see. Yep. You have a lot of people in this book who are huge success stories because of the advocacy they're doing, right?
I think advocacy has certainly become a much more accepted part of the brand of being a chef or a brand of being a restaurant. What was one of the things that was interesting to me was that all the stories in the book, all the chefs that I interviewed for the book, all the chefs that have gone through the boot camp, like I think of them as like influencers and famous and blah, blah, blah. And I had a very famous chef, read the book, and she called me afterwards and she was like, I didn't know half the people that were in your book. I literally had to Google people. And I was like, if you don't know who they are, right?
But honestly, I don't know. I just think people are so overwhelmed with everything hitting them. Like, it's just impossible.
No, it was a really good reminder to me, right? Like that not everybody sees all this happening in the same way that I see it, right? So it was a very good reminder, but it was also like, oh, wait. So the formula or the recipe is actually pretty simple, right? Mm-hmm. It's a advocacy training that incorporates how to deliver a succinct message in a way that appeals to policymakers and people who are in the decision-making tree, which is a little different than people on the line, right? It's all about networks. You mentioned it, like people go to the boot camp and they think, oh my God, this is the best networking I've ever had. Mm-hmm. Chefs are some of the most, and food people in general are some of the most connected, most networked people I've ever met. They can call a farmer, they can call a hotel guy, right? And everything in between. And those are...
Well, because everybody is 6 degrees of separation.
6 degrees of separation, and it's all built on trusted relationships.
Sure.
Right? And so if you have a clear message and you can activate your network and you know what it is that you want to do. So one of the calls to action in the book is if you are inspired to act, you have a responsibility to be educated and informed about it, right? And that there are lots of organizations and lots of people that have done this work before you. And so get to know them, build relationships with them. I love, Tom Colicchio in the book says that one of his first things was being invited to cook at the No Kid Hungry Share Our Strength fundraiser, and how he knew that meant that he had arrived as a chef, right? Because suddenly an organization, a national organization, wanted him to be part of this big event, right? But that also started a 25-year plus journey for him on learning about first school food, then the greater hunger problem, right? Then the political scape, then the founding of Food Policy Action, right? So it's also not linear and it's not quick, but if you can start to build that authentic relationship with an organization or a cause, then you can utilize your networks for it, right? Then you know your script, and it all kind of goes from there.
Right. That's amazing. Well, Tom is a very interesting because he's, as a chef, and he's got a very elevated platform, obviously.
Yep.
He's able to take on more causes and be very hyperbole about them. But let's talk about some of the other people who you really think directly were influenced or were able to take the information that you gave them and create new things.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell the story because it's an issue that's really close to my heart, which is on mental health, right? So there's a chef in Sacramento, California, Patrick Mulvaney, and they had a number of deaths by suicide in the Sacramento food community. And at the same time, around the same time, was when Anthony Bourdain killed himself and his death by suicide. And it meant this explosion of like, what is going on in this industry where people seem happy, people are always providing hospitality and doing all this stuff. And Patrick put all the things to work, right? He's like, okay, who's my audience? My audience is policymakers. I need mental health coverage, right? I need this in
For
policy,
people in the industry.
restaurants in the industry. Okay, I need that. Okay, I also need trainings and all the things. So how am I going to go talk to a donor to get, Kaiser Permanente to come on board and build a training that's specific to food and restaurant and hospitality workers? And then what do I need to know, right, about this industry? And so it was
did he call you for help? I'm just sort of curious. Like, do people call you and are they like, Katherine, I mean, you gave me a roadmap and it's great, but it's overwhelming. It's gotta be.
It's overwhelming. I have a bit of a nickname in the chef community, which is the bat phone. And so when people would go through boot camp, the message was always like, once you figure out what you want to do with this, call Katherine.
Okay.
Right. And so literally for like 10 years of my life, it was like, oh, Katherine, she's the bat phone. Call the bat phone. And people would call me and they'd be like, so-and-so said that you're the bat phone and I can just call you.
Oh my God.
And I was like, okay, yes.
Is it a collect call? Because I feel like
it should be, right?
Right.
Sometimes. No, it's, I have been really grateful and really honored. And I love this community in a way that the penny dropped for me 10 years ago at the very first boot camp and, meeting these chefs and hearing their stories and hearing their relationships with their customers and hearing their relationships with their community. I was like, oh, this is what the nonprofit and advocacy community is looking for in all of the celebrities that they're getting on their causes and then get really frustrated when it doesn't work, that they didn't raise any money off that singular tweet that they got convinced some celebrity to send or
because that's not advocacy.
People think it's advocacy, but advocacy is at its core is you telling somebody who trusts you what you care about,
right,
and giving them something to do, and not lecturing them about it. No,
this is important.
This is important, and this is why it's important to me, right? And this is why I think you should care about this, and this is what happens if you and I care. Right.
But I also think when it comes to chefs, like you keep using the term celebrity.
Yep.
And there are celebrity chefs. But there are also a lot of chefs that you and I know, right?
Yep.
Like they're in your book.
Yeah.
Now, you and I know Paulo.
Yep.
You and I know Rob Ruba. We know them.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like somebody else across the country may be like, I don't know either of them. But they know Bakers Against Racism.
Yeah, no, and Bakers Against Racism, which was founded here in the DC area by, Willa and Paula and Rob, was an amazing reaction to what was happening at the time.
Yep.
And,
and it was fast.
And it was fast. And that is the other thing that I really love about the chef community is they can think on their feet, right? And Paula told me the story about how they just figured out that if they had figured out already the Instagram algorithm, and if they could glitch the picture, people would stick on the post, right?
What?
So at this time, back in 2020, right, the algorithm for Instagram hadn't quite perfected itself, and so if you remember, the original image of Bakers Against Racism was this kind of like moving picture, and they did that because they had figured out that people would spend more time on the posts because it would glitch. Right? Like they don't teach that in advocacy school.
No.
Like, you have to be a chef who is working and hustling and figuring out how to market. So anyway, but they were able to raise millions of dollars. They continue to mobilize at times of need around that. And they were also very intentional about the message that they used and their call to action, right? It was very clear. And the other thing I love about...
Well, the community involvement in that one.
That was what I was just going to say.
I mean, the structure of it, I mean, it wasn't some foundation. It wasn't like send money. It was like, okay, random people are going to be baking.
Yep.
You can buy their baked goods. They're going to...
Yep.
All the money is going to go to this cause.
Yeah, and there is a transparent Google sheet.
Yes, with all of it.
With all of it.
Fascinating.
It was
really fascinating.
And it's a great lesson. I mean, we had done something not the same but similar with a campaign that I worked on before called Nothing But Nets, which was an anti-malaria initiative. And we made it, there was brand, there were collateral aspects, but everybody could do anything they wanted with it, right? There was no like the UN Foundation wasn't worried about like brand control.
Right.
It was like, go raise money if this. So like we had kids doing basketball tournaments, we had people doing large scale charities. And that was like seeing those principles come alive at Bakers Against Racism was just like, it was amazing. This open source advocacy, this community based involvement. And it was so cool. And I think, what I learned from them, right, was that this immediacy and the need that they could bypass everything, right? Well, there were lots of organizations going, what the do I do in this time of need? And they didn't wait.
No, they didn't wait. And plus, I mean, we were in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, it was really fascinating how that one came to be. But I'm sort of like curious, now that you've, like if somebody went to Chef Action Network or, went to the James Beard for your boot camp, were they given directive?
Yeah.
Like, did everybody leave inspired and then wake up the next day and go back to their kitchen? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you gave them the tools.
Yeah. No, it's hard, right? And I think it's, I would say we would track this a lot at Beard. And it was also one of the reasons I really wanted to write the book, right? Which was to democratize this information. Because the thing about the Beard program, which I love, is it's 15 chefs at a time, sometimes 3 times a year, sometimes twice a year. So you're talking 50, 75 chefs a year, right? Which sounds like a lot, but isn't.
No.
Right? Like they're
not in the grand scheme of things.
Not in the grand scheme of things, right? And so, of those people, they're all, I can track pretty much everybody and say they're doing some sort of advocacy in a way that is authentic to them, right? And it might be different than what I would like them to do.
Sure.
Right? I don't think we have at this moment like a chef army that, will materialize for an issue, a singular issue, right? I think what we have done is create educated, knowledgeable, trained advocates who, when they find the cause that is of interest to them,
they'll raise their hand.
Sure. Right? And
and I also think what you're seeing is, or they'll jump on board.
Right?
So they'll see somebody else that they know, or they'll see it on Instagram, or they'll see an article, and they'll be like, oh, well, not only do I know them, I align with this cause, and I know how to help. So I can get in there and get my hands dirty.
I do think there are times, the stories in the book around the formation of the Independent Restaurant Association, right? Independent Restaurant Coalition, which didn't exist. There was no lobbying organization for small and independent restaurants.
No, it was all about the big chains.
And that was a moment. And it was an amazing, sitting there and watching this thing.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so, about March 13th or so, we were watching from New York at the James Beard Foundation, just watching the wave of restaurants close in 2 directions, right? Closing from the West Coast and closing from the Northeast. And it was just going like this.
Yeah.
And everybody was panicking.
Sure.
We did a conference call on the 17th of March that literally crashed WebEx. Everybody was trying to get in on the same time. And it was thousands of people trying to get on pre-Zoom, right?
Well, but also think of, whenever I think of that week, leading up to the 17th, leading up to the 20th, basically, whenever I think of that week, I remember that Monday, being in the car with my mom who was in town with my son, we were driving downtown and the stock market was crashing and I was like, I think you have to go home. Do you know what I mean?
You
In
have to go
restaurants,
home, yeah.
restaurants were like, so we're going to be we're closing off 15% of our space, and then it was 50% of our space. And I remember like I had reservations like 2 days later for dinner, and I was like, I don't think I'm supposed to come. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
No.
It was crazy.
It was crazy, and right, but at the same time, and this is why, I mean, I love it, because it was a total testament to all the work that we had done, which was all of a sudden what we saw was a group of chefs who had been through boot camp organizing in the South, a group of chefs who had been to boot camp organizing in Chicago, in California, right? Like all of these clusters of people who had met each other through boot camp or knew, were all getting on phone calls and like, how do we talk to our mayor? How do we do this? How do we do this? Right.
Right.
And I'm not kidding. Within 2 weeks, we had hired a federal lobbyist, right? Like they were convening twice a day calls with chefs from all over the country.
What are you doing?
What are you doing? What are you doing? Like, how are we doing this? They had organized a spreadsheet on like their members of Congress. Because the other thing that we, in policy, it's not just the authentic relationships we want to have with the organizations, but it's the authentic relationships we want to have with the policymakers, the members of Congress, right? And there is not a restaurant in the country that is not frequented by a member of Congress or somebody on their staff, is not used for a Senate fundraiser, is not a subject of a photo
And
op.
that's national.
It's national.
That's not just what's going on in D.C.
No, it's national, right? Like I would get phone calls, and I actually still get phone calls sometimes from people who are like, hey, this campaign wants to come in and use my restaurant. Like, what do I ask them about the SNAP program? Or what do I ask them about this, right?
Interesting.
And so they had everybody's phone numbers, because in their reservation systems, they knew every chief of staff, every email, every cell phone number, and they just started calling. And I remember, and then we put together all the tools that they needed, like the economic study and the surveys and all the stuff that they could convince policymakers. But I will remember, like, one of the original phone calls of that, Kwame Nwache, Naomi Pomeroy, Ashley Christensen from North Carolina, Tom Colicchio, Kevin Bone from Chicago, right? Like, and with the exception of Tom and Kevin, all of them had been at boot camp. They all knew what they were doing. They are all asking questions like, who's our audience? Like, who are we trying to reach? Like, what are we trying to do? And it was amazing. And within a year, they had restaurant relief.
Well,
at a time when
I was going to say, and I think the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah.
Because they did have restaurant relief, right? Like, there was all these layers. And listen, we know government.
no one thought they were going to get it.
Nobody thought they were going to get it. I mean, people just.
Even the National Restaurant Association didn't think they were going to get it.
Well, let's not go down that road. But, listen, I'm very good friends with Kathy Hollinger.
Yeah.
She's been on the show 1,000 times. She's no longer the head of the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington, but I know firsthand.
No, the
But
local restaurant associations were totally different at the time. Kathy, and I mean, I love Kathy, and I love working with like the Restaurant Association in Colorado.
Oh yeah, the one in
Restaurant.
Connecticut is excellent. No,
Right.
but you understand what I'm saying. Like these local restaurant associations, they were like,
Let's do it.
Let's do it. How do we help? What do we do? I mean, she had chefs knocking on her door in the middle of the pandemic, being like, "You need to help me."
No,
she was like in a mask. Like, no, I will help you. Call me.
Call me.
Don't show up on my front door.
I mean, it was such an amazing time to think about the resilience of local communities and how people really, the customers rallied, the restaurants rallied, and then they rallied for themselves, and no one thought they were going to get money. Like everybody, like the cruise lines were getting money, the airlines, because they're an industry.
The industry, but not the independents.
Yeah, and there was no voice for it.
Amazing.
And it was pretty amazing. And I'm very excited to see that organization continue to mature and tackle things like credit card fees and
tip
wages,
all the issues. The industry is really going through, I think, this incredible growth period. Like a lot of people are stymied. There's a lot of complaints out there from both the restaurant side and the consumer side. But actually, Tom Colicchio said, like in the first couple of days of the pandemic on social media, the restaurant industry, the structure of the restaurant industry no longer works.
Yeah.
It needs, and it hasn't worked in a long time. It needs to be reimagined. Yeah. And a lot of people were beating that drum in the beginning days of the pandemic. Yeah. But, and I've said this on the show before, everybody was also chasing their asses trying to get $1 in. So nobody took up the cause to make the changes necessary that the industry needs. But now I think you're seeing people like Hollis, what's that?
Hollis Silverman, yeah.
Yeah, Hollis Silverman, who's like, no, you know, I pay for maternity leave and there's vacation time and mental health. Like, I am building the restaurant that I want to work in. They're growing pains. It's not easy. Danny Myers tried it with the tip thing and that didn't work. I think he thought everybody was going to jump on board and they didn't. So, but I think he was ahead of his time. Yeah. Change takes time. And I think in 5 years, we're going to look back at all the screaming and yelling about tip wages and, you know, whatever else people are angry about right now, and staff shortages and on mental health and all these things. And they will now be a part of the industry as the industry.
I think they'll be a part of the industry as the industry if we can figure out the policy playing field. Because what I do, it's not easy. It is easier to build a restaurant or a restaurant group from the ground up with all the things, right? There are a lot of restaurants that are trying to retrofit an old model, right? So they're trying to make sure that their staffs understand, right? They're trying to make sure their customers understand, right? And that is an unlevel playing field.
Well, but it's a cultural shift.
It's a huge cultural shift, and it is actually a policy playing field minefield, a policy unlevel playing field related to policy, because there are no tax benefits at the state and local level or the city level for businesses that provide maternity leave. There's farm workers and restaurant workers are still the only two industries across the United States that you're allowed to pay a sub-minimum wage, right? That is written into policy. We actually haven't raised the federal minimum wage since the 90s, right? Insane. And in a meaningful way.
It's an industry without healthcare options, mental health care options. Like, benefits do not exist.
But benefits do not exist in a way that incentivize the owner to provide them, which then, right? So, and we forget that, I mean, these are owners, right? And they have to, you know, everybody always says, you know, you have to be a sustainable restaurant. And one of the best quotes was from Ari, who was one of the founders of Zingerman's, right? Who was like, there's no such thing as a sustainable restaurant that's closed. Right? Like,
how am I helping if
I'm not providing jobs and I'm not providing?
It's still a business.
It's still a business at the end of the day.
Right.
So, you know what? If you're still a business at the end of the day, you have a responsibility to go ask the mayor, to go ask the Congress, to go ask the state legislature to increase the minimum wage, right? Because otherwise, you're trying to do this thing over here
all by yourself.
Agreed. And you're competing against people, and you're doing this thing, and everybody's going to the race to the common denominator because they're all business owners, right? So, like, it is complicated, and I don't want to sugarcoat it for folks that, it's crazy as all get out that more restaurants aren't like Hollis Silverman's restaurant group, but she also had the amazing opportunity to build it from the ground up, and from everything she had learned.
Yes, because she worked with Jose for so many years,
right? Like,
but she was really intentional. I think she's. I think what they're doing is really exciting and amazing, and you are
and
right.
It's delicious.
Oh yeah, I love duck and cheese.
Which is the other piece about this. Like, we talk about food all the time. I had a conversation today with somebody, and they were like, "Well, why are chefs important?" And I was like, because your food has to be delicious. Like, at the end of the day, if you don't even agree that they're great spokespeople, but they are,
right.
The food has to be good.
But, you know, don't you think, chefs aside, including chefs, don't you think, like, if you think about social media today, a lot of people think that what they have to say is of value and important. Now, I'm not saying that's always right, but it has changed that playing field, right? So you got people out there saying all sorts of shit, but that doesn't mean that they should. So an educated person who knows how to communicate their passion and have the facts, which is important, and to get in front of the players who can make the changes. Yeah,
and also just understanding who your audience is, right? Like, you know, I do think social media, the prevalence of all of the, you know, we used to be so controlled, right? And like where you could put things or place things. And now, you know, anybody can post a review about a restaurant, or anybody can, say whatever they want without any sort of education, without any sort of knowledge of an industry, without, right? And what my challenge is that I wish, especially business owners and influencers and others, took a step back before they engaged, right? Because trolls will give you as much oxygen as you give them.
Agreed.
Right? And like people who say negative stuff will give you as much oxygen, like they will take as much oxygen as you give them, right? And so, there's a great guide to social media for, was actually created by a social justice advocate, a Black woman, Renee Bracy Sherman, and she did this whole analysis of how to engage on social media. And her number one thing is like, don't.
Well, I have to be honest, I agree with that wholeheartedly, right? Like, I'm very careful on social media personally. Like, I have lots of things that I would like to say, but I don't.
Yeah.
And given, like you said when we were off air, it's just a dumpster fire out there right now. There's just so many things happening. The environment is so stressful, even though we're going about living our daily lives. There's lots of things I would love to put out on social media that I don't do it. And I'm always so surprised by those who do, because I'm like, what's your end goal here? Yeah. Right? Like, wham, I'm unhappy. Like, all that kind of stuff. I'll just tell you one funny story because you brought up Yelp. When I first started the listareyowantit.com, it was just at that same time, because people didn't use emails as a way to communicate things in the same way. There were no newsletters and stuff like that at that capacity, especially by an individual. And just at that time, the Washington Post was allowing you to leave comments on reviews and stuff like that, which, now you're like, everybody leaves comments. But at that time, it was brand new. And there was a couple of gentlemen, they were all men, and they would write me after they posted comments, like on a restaurant review that Tom did or something that somebody else wrote.
Yep.
And they would be like, hey, Nycci, you should see my review. And I was like, what? Isn't that a review? Like, those are comments.
It's a comment.
But it gave them value to them.
Yeah.
It gave them something to stand on. And I think we are now subjected to that all the time.
I think we're subjected to. I think that social media and media in general have a very strong place in the world of advocacy. What I think,
if it all shut down tomorrow, I couldn't be happier. Seriously, if they were like, it's all those apps, ding, they went away, I'd be like, that's great.
Yeah, I think it's a whole other show to talk about, like the transition of like all these people, like who are transitioning from Twitter, formerly Twitter, to X, now going to Threads, and like how hard it is.
Honestly, I gotta be honest with you. I think Twitter is, and I'm so grateful for it. Like, I think Twitter's gonna die, and Threads is never, like, they're just, you can't recreate it.
You can't recreate it,
and I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I'm sort of okay with it too. But the more important thing for me, for people who genuinely feel like they have issues or causes that they care about, and social media is the platform for them to do it, right? That's where their audience is or whatever. They do need to understand their audience, right? So if you've spent 20 years building a brand where where what you have done is post beautiful pictures of food, and then suddenly you post information about SNAP benefits,
right?
Your audience is not going to understand, right?
Unless you give them context. Sure.
So maybe the next plate of beautiful food is,
by the way,
this plate of food was created by, right? So like understanding where your audience is at, meeting them where they are, providing context, and then you said something that I think is a hallmark to really effective advocacy is, what do you want them to do with it?
Right.
Because is this about you having an opinion, or do you have a really tangible action for them to do? So, right, there's a cause that you care about, and there's a petition active for the cause that you care about. And you have conditioned your audience to know that that's the type of thing that they might get from you. Right? Like if you went to my Instagram feed, you get pictures of food, pictures of my cat,
right,
and social justice stuff, right? Like sign this petition, do this thing, and support women-owned businesses. Like that's like pretty consistently, if you went through the carousel, that's what you would get. So it's no surprise when I post a petition.
Sure.
Or it's no surprise when I do these things. And I think that's what people don't understand is like they get really, there's an emotion that happens and they feel like I have to say something. And ask yourself not only why you have to say it, who you need to say it to, and what exactly you want them to do once you've said it.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have those, well, you're screaming out into the ether because it makes you feel good.
Right. And honestly, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. I think part of the problem is a lot of times they just want to say it. And then I'm very turned off by it. Because I'm just sort of like, what am I supposed to do with your anger or your angst or your injustice?
Always
do you know
give
what I mean?
your folks something to do.
I love that. That's a great way to end the show. Okay.
Yeah.
Katherine Miller.
Thanks.
We can talk for hours about all the things. At the Table, The Chef's Guide to Advocacy. I have to be honest, you do not have to be a chef to read this. I feel like this title is misleading. I mean, at the table I get, and I love the picture of the bread, but
well, your publisher will always tell you who know your audience.
I know, but I feel in reading this, I'm not a chef. I am a part of the industry, but I really saw a lot of value in here for anybody who is looking to get their voice heard and make change. And isn't that the point?
No, that's 100% the point, and I really hope it's a guide. And I think the most satisfying review I've gotten so far is my 19-year-old niece who read an early chapter of the book's partially dedicated to her, and she's like, I now understand about the food system. And I was like, that's the best review.
Yay!
So yeah, buy it, give it to your favorite chef, give it to your favorite like culinary student, give it to your favorite person who you go to dinner with, just so that they'll know a little bit more about the food system.
Process. I love it. Okay, tell everybody where they can find you on social media.
I'm on social media at Table81 is on Instagram and Threads, and just Katherine Miller, and my website's table81.com.
Excellent.
And you can buy the book at Island Press.
Just sit with me for one sec.
Yeah, of course.
So thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for joining us on another episode of Industry Night. Everything you heard here today, you can find on the listareyouwantit.com. Of course, you want to follow me at NYCCINELLIS on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all the things that are going to go away overnight at some point. And of course, YouTube. And anything you heard here today, if you have any questions for Katherine or questions for me about places I've been and what I've been doing, you can just pop me a line on any one of those platforms, and I'm delighted to help. Don't forget to subscribe. Oh, and on my Instagram, I have a channel now. I'm not really sure what that means, but I'm putting information on it. So check that out as well. Thanks again for joining me today. You should come check out the Watermark because it's pretty fabulous. Have a delicious week.
Produced by Heartcast Media.